Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for coming to our site and joining us in this conversation, this voice from the margins. We have to apologize that last week we weren't able to pull it together. There was a lot of things happening in Washington, leading up to the Occupy inauguration and the Women's March and everything else, and um, everyone sort of got pulled in different directions. So we had to postpone our show, but we're here tonight, and we're here with a very, very important guest who, as a consequence of us postponing the show, we have even more to talk about because he just, well, actually still is in North Dakota. He was in Standing Rock for the last few days. And that is our guest tonight, Jamil Dakwar, who is the director of the American Civil Liberties Union's Human Rights Program, where he leads a team of lawyers that advises all of the ACLU's national programs and affiliates across the country. In his capacity, he oversees all of the human rights research, documentation, advocacy, and litigation before all of the international human rights bodies. Before Jamil got to the ACLU, he worked at Human Rights Watch, and before he came to the U.S., he was a senior attorney with ADALA, the Legal Center for Arab and Minority Rights in Israel. He's also now a adjunct professor at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice there in New York. Jamil, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Pleasure being with you, Jamil.
Yes, sir. Well, we have a lot to talk about, and we have a very short time. As I shared with you, the time goes by very, very quick, and so we want to take full advantage of your experiences and your expertise. We are facing a new administration. Many of us are concerned about the human rights situation in this country and really globally. And of course, you are a long-term human rights activist and human rights defender. Jamil, what are some of the issues that, not assuming that Trump is going to be a violator of human rights. If Trump and his administration was going to be responsive to the request on the part of the human rights community to address some ongoing human rights issues, what are some of those ongoing human rights issues that you would like to see the Trump administration attempt to address and to reverse?
Well, the Trump administration and the president came to office with many statements, very much of a dangerous statements, promises on the campaign that signal that he does not believe and agree with the Obama administration, doesn't agree with many of the policies of the Obama administration. The one thing that he signaled that when there was really interesting to see whether he is genuine about it, what he really means by it, when he says, America first. Because I think when he talks about America first, the question is whether that means that the United States will be much more focused on the issues that are really concern the United States, particularly with regard to people in the United States, and ending some of the things that we've seen over the last years and decades by the United States overseas, and to what extent that will benefit the rights of people in the United States as a whole. But I think, as we have seen in the last several days, he is intending to use slogans, but not necessarily to follow on, at least in the kind of immediate steps that he took right after his inauguration. He doesn't seem to be so much concerned about America first in terms of workers' rights in America, for example, or particularly about the people who are in America. But I think it's a way of strengthening his nationalism, this sort of view that we should not care about the world, but we should care about ourselves, without really providing what this philosophy means, other than really now being more supported by all kinds of executive actions that he is putting forward. Some of them are very dangerous and harmful to human rights and civil liberties, not just to people in America, but I think have an impact on people outside the United States.
But before we get to the consequences or possible results in terms of outside of the U.S., new things that this administration may be involved in. What are some of the ongoing human rights issues that you have worked on in your capacity at the ACLU that we need to try to impress upon the Trump administration to reverse?
Well, one of the things that we think that should be ended was the Guantanamo, the closure of Guantanamo. One of the things that we worked on for the last, at least of my tenure at the ACLU, of the last 12 years. And
okay, did we lose Jamil? Jamil, are you there?
Yes, I'm sorry. There was I was dropped off from the call. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Okay, continue. So Guantanamo being one of the issues?
One of the issues that we worked on is Guantanamo. What the Guantanamo signal, indefinite detention, assault on human dignity, and the regime of legal black hole, legal there's no application of the law. And I think that started in Bush, continued in even though President Obama promised to close Guantanamo, but he maintained unfair military commission system. He didn't do enough to close it in the years that were critical to do it, and then put a group of detainees in a category that allowed for them to be in indefinite detention. So we would like that to be ended. Obviously, the issue of the use of drones by the Obama administration and creating the infrastructure for it, the presidential powers given to the president through legal analysis and interpretation that we have said that does not really comply with international law, not even with the U.S. Constitution. We think that is a dangerous tool to leave to the President Trump, and we want it to be ended. Surveillance practices, again, another example from the national security arena. The infrastructure that has been left by the Obama administration is terribly dangerous for this president to use. Against Americans or people in America, but also against non-citizens. And in another area is the area of immigration. I mean, immigration deportation and detention, particularly family detention, has been a serious human rights issue that we have raised. The fact that people were not given a chance, an opportunity to claim asylum in the United States. Now, this seemed to be much easier for the next president to say, well, I can do away not only with expanding detention, and I will be expanding deportation, and I will go further by what he is now promising to put a de facto Muslim ban, ending admission of refugees, particularly Syrian refugees, resettlement of refugees, particularly from Syria, with really serious ramifications on what the United States at least have done over the years. The United States has a very problematic asylum system, very politicized. We know that there's not ideal, it's not perfect, but at the very least, it allowed a number of people to be able to claim asylum, and there was a chance for people to make it, and there was not the same as explicitly as there is being suggested now, that if you are from a particular country or maybe from a particular religion or ethnicity, you may not be able to get the opportunity and chance to seek asylum and come to the United States. And there's many other areas, for example, that we have not been able to end the rights violations under the Obama administration, but I think we are hoping that there will be at least more level of awareness. I mean, that's the thing. If people at the area that I worked on, areas of national security, there was not much of attention and awareness in the American public towards what was happening in the name of Americans, in the name of national security, and allowed the president to use some of the tools. And now, the hope is that people will really understand the dangerousness of allowing those kinds of policy to move forward, and allowing a space not just for the courts and for legislatures, but for the people and for the movements and social protest out in the streets to be the counter response to what they will be seeing coming out of the White House.
Exactly. Now, Jamil, that was really the purpose of my question. The fact that you and I both know these violations have been going on for quite some time. but with little public outcry. But now that people's consciousness has been engaged, now we can perhaps begin to address some of these ongoing human rights violations and issues. Now, one ongoing issue that many people are aware of is the situation in Standing Rock. And you are now in North Dakota. You were at the campsite for the last few days. Tell us a little bit about what you saw, and but more importantly, help our audience to understand what are some of the legal and political issues in play with this pipeline and the issue around indigenous sovereignty.
I mean, you really cannot understand what's happening in North Dakota and what's happening in Standing Rock without understanding the really centuries, the histories of injustice and genocide against indigenous peoples in the United States and in North America in general. Because you will see that over the years, how the laws and how even sometimes the courts rubber stamped the decisions of the executive branch, the presidents, the laws that were enacted by Congress, that basically expropriated massive amount of land, intruded into territories and treaty lands that were promised under treaties that were signed between the Native Americans and the U.S. government. And now we're seeing just another recent example of that, an example of where really a small community in North Dakota of Standing Rock had to face a gigantic profit-making project that has serious ramification also on the environment, but has with a clearly racially biased reasons for moving the pipeline while it was supposed to go closer to Bismarck. Now is going to go near or north of the reservation and underneath the Mississippi River, and endangering the water resources of the community, of the indigenous communities. So this has been a pattern that has a long history, and therefore the legal and political ramifications are the only difference is that today they are the legal ramifications of the 2016-17 America, which means you have the corporations have more power, you have administration that is denying that there's climate change or denying that the science has any role. You have a situation where an administration that is not recognizing the self-determination of Indian people and their right to their land. And you have a 2017 reality where you are not able to really get the courts to stand to do what they're supposed to do, to be independent.
Jamil, let's talk some more about Jamil. Let's talk some more about the 2017 realities by turning now to the audience, and they have a number of questions for you, and you can go back and make some of your points again. Shantae wanted to know about how we can, what can we do about this pipeline? You've touched on that somewhat. What can the people do to try to reverse the decision by the Trump administration to go ahead with the pipeline?
So the Trump administration did that, or the president did two things. He signed an executive order that basically expedited as a matter of a principle infrastructure projects, including pipelines. But then he signed in a presidential memorandum that he said that he would want to expedite the review of the pipeline by the different federal agencies. And there is environmental review that's being conducted now, environmental assessment that's being underway. While he did not say that he would want them to circumvent the law, it clearly sends the message that he wanted to be expedited and he wanted to be approved. Now, what it means is that now I think that it's important for people to realize that there is a legal challenge that the tribe, the Council Rock, Standing Rock Council tribe, that will be continuing with earth rights. there will be a challenge through the federal review and see to what extent it was full and impartial and serious and meaningful, and included meaningful consultation with the indigenous communities. And there will be also a role for the people who has stood with Standing Rock tribe and people from all over the world, particularly in here in the country, to continue to stand with them. And there is a call to do also the divestment from some of the companies that are benefiting, that are profiting from this pipeline. So there is action for people to do. We are calling today, yesterday, ACLU called on people to take action, to call on the governor of North Dakota, who is a newly elected governor, Republican governor, to rein in the law enforcement agencies that have been brutalizing some of the protesters in North Dakota. They've been using indiscriminate, excessive force, including crowd control weapons in a very unsafe and dangerous way. We're calling on him to take responsibility of what's happening there and make sure that people can protest peacefully and without being harmed and losing, and left with long-term disabilities. So there's much that can be done.
That sounds good, Jamil. And I think that people can go to the ACLU website and get more information on that. Let's do this, Jamil. We have a series of questions. Let's see if you can respond very quickly, maybe in sort of a rapid fire way, with a number of some of these questions that people have. For example, Regina wants to know, she says, I am Muslim, a Muslim woman who wears a hijab, and very worried that I would go to jail for it. What's your response?
No, you will not go to jail for it. Muslim hijab will not be illegal in the United States and will never be illegal, because the U.S. Constitution and First Amendment will protect your right. And we, the ACLU and many other organizations, will make sure that that doesn't happen. The U.S. government, they can have a high rhetoric on banning Muslims and trying to demonize Muslims in this country, but we will never allow this country to turn into authoritarian regime. And I think that's the power of the people.
There you go. Montague wants to know, is it actually a crime for a city to declare itself a sanctuary city?
Sorry, I didn't get, can you repeat the question again?
Is it actually a crime for a city to declare itself a sanctuary city?
As far as I know, it is not a crime. It may be in conflict with some federal policies that have been, particularly in around some federal grants that may be provided or not provided for their cooperations with immigration enforcement. But I don't think that they're taking their responsibility as local governments to do what they think is right would be a crime. I don't think that we would agree with criminalization of people who are trying to provide safe haven to people who are really vulnerable, people who are really in need of protection. I think this is the really challenge, that we should stand for the right thing. And I think cities and sanctuaries are really the one of the main protections for undocumented immigrants in this country.
Mary wants to question. If Syria becomes stabilized, wouldn't immigration to the U.S. cease?
The sound is not so good.
Oh, Mary is asking the question regarding Syrian refugees, that if Syria is stabilized, wouldn't it have the consequence of stopping the refugee issue in Europe and refugees needing to come to the U.S.?
Well, yes, refugees don't want to become refugees just as a matter of fun. They do it because they are in danger. They want protection, and that's a duty of people and governments to provide them with protection under the Refugee Convention and other international human rights instruments. What is important to note that this is not the first time that people seek refuge in America, and this is not the first time that America did mistakes. There were some mistakes, and there were some policies denied refugees from certain countries, particularly Jewish, for example, refugees, to come to America. We should not make that mistake again. We should be learning from the history, and we should do what we can in order to provide safe haven to refugees. And the United States is doing very little compared to European countries, especially Germany, where there are over a million refugees has been settled in the last year or two.
Mm-hmm. Jamil, Pete wants to know what kind of international war crimes
I
enforcement
want to
can
just
be.
correct
Go ahead.
the sound. I'm not hearing you well. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry also. Pete wants to know what kind of international war crimes enforcement can be used to stop the reinstatement of torture.
Well, torture is a crime under federal law. It's a crime under under international law, particularly under the Rome Statute. So there is international jurisdiction for prosecuting war criminals or people who would be committing a crime of torture, acts of torture, and orders. So those who are commanders or orchestrating the policy of torture, they would be also subject to the international crime of torture. Now, the problem with the United States, it's not party to the International Criminal Court, but there are also universal jurisdiction of other countries that they can invoke in order to hold government officials from the United States that if they decide to revive the use of torture. So torture is illegal and immoral and unacceptable here in the United States, but and I think the law is much more clear now than it used to be, at least after the Bush administration years, where they defined torture in a very distorted way. The Congress had to take additional measures in the last year to make it very clear that there is no such a thing as torture light or as waterboarding that is not torture. Obviously, every government can find the exceptions and can find the ways to do it, either through third countries, which is something that the Bush administration did through the rendition program to torture, or they could do it again in secret by hiding it. The question is whether it will be tolerated by the officials, agencies that know now that they could be committing war crimes and could be prosecuted in the United States and abroad for it.
Exactly. Jamil, do you believe that there, in fact, will be a Muslim registry in the U.S.?
Well, I'm not sure that this will be Muslim registry the way that is being described. Maybe there will be a form of keeping the surveillance and monitoring of Muslim communities. Let's remember that the Bush administration created the NSEERS program. The NSEERS program, the National Security Entrance Exit Registration System, had been in place for years under the Bush years. 138,000 Muslim who were in the United States registered under this program. And even though it was claimed to be a major successful counterterrorism tool by the Bush administration, it turned out to be a complete failure, counterproductive. Not a single case of federal prosecution resulted from this registration program of the Bush administration. We were happy that the Obama administration at least eliminated the entire program before Trump took office. But so I think the question is whether they would revive something similar. It will be subject to litigation. It will be subject to more scrutiny. Hopefully, there will be also some legislative scrutiny, and we will see people resisting that. We will see people who will say we are all Muslims. We will register as Muslims, and that's something that we have not seen in 2001 and 2002 or 2003, and we will probably see it under the Trump administration.
You know, one thing that did not end, though, under the Obama administration was the reported cases where it appeared that state authorities, specifically the FBI, were engaged in a number of dubious cases where it seemed like certain Arab and Muslim young men were entrapped. Is that a concern that you have going forward? ACLU.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that, Jamo. We also were very unsatisfied with a number of other policies that remained intact under the Obama administration. For example, the Justice Department, when they revised the Justice Department or the Attorney General guidance on the use of race by law enforcement, which included also the use of religion. They included national security exception, and as well as a border exception, which allowed the FBI to use religious affiliation and as part of their opening investigations, keeping investigation, and that was a major concern, remains a major concern. There are also other areas that as you described, where there would be resorting to all kinds of measures, including entrapment, including infiltration or the recruitment of people who are snitches and snooping on the communities. This is something that could be definitely expanded on the Trump administration. The head of the FBI, Comey, who is supposed to remain under Trump, was the one who continued those policies, and he did not do anything to really end. Only under litigation, under court orders, in some situations that we've seen in New York and in other jurisdictions, that they had to comply. But the problem remains that the executive branch and the security services, particularly the FBI and other agencies, still have the power, and they have expanded guidance or expanded powers to do the surveillance and monitoring, and then start to build those cases that may not really be other than people expressing their religious freedom, people who are expressing their beliefs, and we've seen how those kinds of cases will become. They start with a news conference, and they announce a big terrorism cases, and then when they come to trial, they end up
nothing there
with nothing.
Yeah. Now, we have about a minute and a half left, Jamil. Now, we know that ACLU has done a lot of work on the police in the U.S., the militarization of the police, a fantastic report that was put out a couple of years ago. Patrick wants to know what can we do about the increasing militarized police in the U.S., and what do you make of the new law in Louisiana, apparently, that is supposed to make resisting an arrest a hate crime against the police?
Well, this is problematic if that's what you're describing, and it is something that we will look into. I'm not familiar with this law in Louisiana, but this administration, the Trump administration, and the president said that he would be the law and order president. I think those two, just invoking those two words, gives us enough to fear and to be concerned about. Because when he says that, it means that he's going to basically declare increased war on communities of color, Black communities, Latinos communities, and indigenous communities, and using excessive force by backing law enforcement agencies and unions, by diminishing the role of the Civil Rights Division and the Justice Department. We are seriously concerned. We will have many ways to try to respond. Some of this will be in litigation, but many of this will be in advocacy, in supporting organizations that are on the ground, and in particular supporting protest around the country. This will be, I think, one of the important thing that we can see happening is that people will be demanding change, not just by lobbying members of Congress, but by being on the streets and calling, just like Black Lives Matter did for so long. Yes. And impacted and influenced the discourse in the United States. We will see more of that, and the ACLU will be there to support.
Will be there. Now, Jamil, we have about 90 seconds left, but I wanted to ask this question regarding what we saw happen in D.C. this weekend with what many people consider to be the excessive charges against the protesters, facing felony charges. Is this something that is going to be able to stand in court? And will we see more of this? And if so, what might be the role of the ACLU?
Yes, this is part of the having a president that does not tolerate dissent, does not think that the press and the First Amendment matter, we will be very aggressive in responding to these kind of incidents, whether it's against the journalists, the media, but also against citizens and people who will be expressing themselves and they should be protected. They should be able to do so without fear that they're going to be charged or jailed or being denied even entry to the country under what we are hearing the Trump administration will do.
We're so happy, Jamil, that ACLU will be, as always, on the case. And we are really appreciative of the fact that you were able to join us from North Dakota. And we thank you so much. Where can people go to get more information on your program? Hello?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last thing.
Where can people go to get more information on the work that you do at ACLU?
Well, they can follow me on Twitter, Dakwar. So this is my handle. They could go to the ACLU website and they'll see all the work that we do, including the work of the ACLU Human Rights Program.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again, Jamil. Thank all of you who sent in all these questions. And of course, we didn't have a chance to get to most of them. I'm going to ask people to also to begin to follow me. I'm doing more Twitter at Jamil Baraka. So thanks everybody again for tuning in. Thank you for your fantastic questions. And please join us again next week for another conversation with a voice from the margins. Thank you so much.